发现不明空中目标向黄岩岛接近，方位洞，高度3000米。
对空组织各兵力协同查证。预办。
In late 2025, the South China Sea crossed a perilous new threshold. Satellite and open-source intelligence confirmed that the People's Liberation Army, PLA, Southern Theater Command had deployed nuclear-capable H-6 bombers armed with YJ-12 supersonic anti-ship missiles near Scarborough Shoal, Bajo de Masinloc, a flashpoint lying just 120 nautical miles off Luzon. This deployment, coinciding with China's National Day on October 1, 2025, transformed a symbolic holiday into a calculated demonstration of force. Accompanied by Type 054A frigates and J-16 multi-role fighters, the move marked the first time Beijing had stationed high-intensity strike platforms inside the immediate perimeter of the Philippines' Exclusive Economic Zone, EEZ. With the YJ-12's 500-kilometer strike range, the entire island of Luzon, including critical military installations such as Clark Air Base and Subic Bay, fell within striking distance, signaling that China had moved beyond the gray zone of harassment and into overt military posturing. This escalation represents a decisive strategic rupture in China's South China Sea playbook. For over a decade, Beijing relied primarily on the China Coast Guard, CCG, and Chinese Maritime Militia, CMM, to enforce its sweeping maritime claims through non-military means: intimidation, blockade, and surveillance.
开始登陆行动准备。
战斗指令。
The introduction of PLA Navy, PLAN, and Air Force, PLAAF, assets into the contested area signifies a new phase of militarization and the establishment of an anti-access article denial, A2AD, zone, a buffer designed to deter Philippine, U.S., and allied operations. This transition from hybrid coercion to military deployment has raised the regional risk threshold and narrowed the margin for de-escalation. China's aim is clear: to assert control over Scarborough Shoal not merely through lawfare and patrols, but through credible strike capability and sustained military presence. For the Philippines, the deployment has become a geopolitical breaking point. Long committed to diplomatic caution and legal protest, Manila now finds itself at the front line of a militarized maritime contest. President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. has declared that any deliberate killing of Filipino personnel in the West Philippine Sea would constitute a red line that could invoke the 1951 Mutual Defense Treaty, MDT, with the United States, an unambiguous warning of escalation.
If any Filipino serviceman is killed by an attack from any foreign power, then that is time to invoke the Mutual Defense Treaty.
The Armed Forces of the Philippines, AFP, under General Romeo Bronner Jr., has adopted new interagency protocols to manage gray zone encounters and respond to China's evolving tactics with coordinated firmness. Meanwhile, Manila's Assertive Transparency Initiative, launched in 2023, has redefined its response strategy, publicizing Chinese aggression through verified footage and imagery to rally international condemnation. This has produced measurable results, with the G7 foreign ministers formally condemning China's illicit, coercive, and dangerous actions in early 2025. At the same time, the Philippines is reinforcing its alliances to transform exposure into deterrence. The Expanded Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, EDCA, with the United States has added new rotational bases across Luzon, enhancing interoperability and rapid deployment capacity. The Japan-Philippines Reciprocal Access Agreement, RAA, finalized in 2025, now allows joint exercises and mutual logistical support. These bilateral efforts are being complemented by multilateral military drills, such as the August 2025 naval and air exercises near Scarborough Shoal, involving the Philippines, the US, Australia, and Canada, highlighting a coordinated allied effort to check China's growing power projection. The path to escalation from August to October 2025 has been marked by a succession of high-risk incidents, each testing the limits of restraint. The August 11th collision between a Chinese Type 052D destroyer and a China Coast Guard cutter while pursuing the BRP Suluan revealed reckless overextension of Chinese operations. In September, a water cannon assault by the CCG tore through the bridge of a Philippine supply vessel, injuring a sailor, while the later discovery of a Chinese autonomous underwater vehicle, AUV, inside Philippine waters pointed to intensified subsurface surveillance. Beijing justified these provocations as necessary measures to expel illegal Philippine ships, even as its state media attempted to portray China as the victim of dangerous Philippine maneuvers. Collectively, these incidents reveal Beijing's increasing risk tolerance and determination to normalize military-grade operations in contested areas. Analytically, the situation has become a feedback loop of escalation. China's fusion of civilian and military forces, the CCG, CMM, PLAN, and PLAAF, creates a layered coercive system, while Manila's defiance, backed by law and alliances, ensures constant friction. Scarborough Shoal's proximity to Luzon and its dual role as a strategic gateway and vital fishing ground make it non-negotiable for both sides. The future trajectory points toward continued low-level confrontations, ramming, water cannoning, and aerial intimidation, with the constant danger of a fatal incident crossing the Philippine red line, which could trigger U.S. intervention under the MDT. Yet, amid this perilous dynamic, a diplomatic off-ramp remains possible. The ASEAN Regional Forum, ARF, or a revived Code of Conduct, COC, dialogue, could serve as limited stabilizers, but only if China respects the 2016 arbitral ruling and Manila sustains its dual-track policy of transparency and alliance building. Ultimately, the shift from gray zone coercion to military deployment at Scarborough Shoal has ended Manila's strategic ambiguity, forcing it into a firmly aligned, rules-based defense posture. The shoal now stands as the litmus test for the strength of international law, alliance deterrence, and regional resilience in the face of revisionist power. In essence, Scarborough Shoal is no longer merely a disputed reef. It is the front line of a global contest between law and power, where the outcome will shape not only the Philippine sovereignty, but the future of the Indo-Pacific security order. Following the deployment of H-6 bombers and YJ-12 supersonic missiles at Scarborough Shoal, Bajo de Masinloc, both Beijing and Manila have entrenched their opposing positions, framing the crisis as a test of sovereignty and international law. Manila's stance remains unequivocal. The shoal lies squarely within the Philippines' 200 nautical mile exclusive economic zone, EEZ, as reaffirmed by the 2016 Permanent Court of Arbitration, PCA, ruling under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS. Philippine officials have condemned China's deployment as illegal, provocative, and destabilizing, asserting that it constitutes a direct violation of international maritime law. While tensions rise, Manila has so far ruled out deploying its own navy to the area, seeking to avoid a catastrophic miscalculation. Instead, it has opted for a civilian-led strategy, relying on the Philippine Coast Guard, PCG, to conduct monitoring and patrol operations under the doctrine of assertive transparency, a deliberate choice to expose Chinese militarization without escalating to open confrontation.
Philippine Coast Guard Vessel 4403, since you have disregarded our warning.
This is Philippine Coast Guard BRP Malabrigo MRRV 4402. Conducting site survey for buoy laying operation within the Philippine Exclusive Economic Zone.
Beijing, meanwhile, has pursued a subtler yet equally coercive narrative to justify its military expansion. In September 2025, China's State Council announced the creation of a 3,523-hectare National Nature Reserve, encompassing Scarborough Shoal. Framed as an environmental initiative, the move was accompanied almost immediately by intensified law enforcement operations and combat readiness patrols, conducted by the China Coast Guard and People's Liberation Army Navy. This maneuver reflects China's use of lawfare, the strategic deployment of domestic legislation and legal rhetoric to reinforce territorial claims and normalize its presence. By redefining a contested maritime feature as a protected ecological zone, Beijing seeks to mask militarization behind the facade of environmental stewardship while simultaneously restricting Philippine access to traditional fishing grounds and patrol routes. Manila's response was swift and categorical. National Security Advisor Eduardo Año dismissed the Nature Reserve designation, as less about protecting the environment and more about justifying China's control, describing it as a clear pretext toward eventual occupation. Philippine officials highlight the hypocrisy of Beijing's claims to ecological preservation, citing massive coral destruction and environmental degradation caused by China's extensive dredging and artificial island construction in nearby areas such as Mischief Reef and Fiery Cross Reef. For Manila, China's environmental narrative is merely a tool for legitimizing militarization, one that further erodes the maritime environment it purports to protect. The exchange encapsulates the widening rift between China's lawfare-driven justifications and the Philippines' rule-of-law-based rejection, a confrontation that continues to reshape the regional balance between coercion and compliance.
China's provocative and irresponsible actions have clearly impeded once again the safety of the Filipino people.
The Philippines has now drawn its most explicit boundary yet in the ongoing confrontation with China. President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. has publicly defined a red line: the deliberate killing of any Filipino serviceman or citizen by Chinese forces in the West Philippine Sea will constitute an act of extreme provocation, one that he described as being very close to an act of war. Such an incident, Marcos warned, would trigger the 1951 Mutual Defense Treaty, MDT, between the Philippines and the United States, a move that could internationalize the conflict overnight. This declaration marks a profound shift in Manila's security posture, from cautious diplomatic protestations to deterrence through alliance signaling, conveying that Chinese escalation would no longer remain a bilateral issue, but would instead invite a coordinated military response from treaty allies. Within the Philippine defense establishment, the Armed Forces of the Philippines, AFP, has mirrored this sharpened tone. General Romeo Bronner Jr., Chief of Staff of the AFP, described the deployment of People's Liberation Army Navy, PLAN, ships alongside China Coast Guard, CCG, vessels near Philippine-claimed waters as an escalatory change in China's tactics. While emphasizing the need for prudence to avoid miscalculation, Bronner stressed that such developments demand firmness and operational readiness. In response, the AFP has begun crafting new internal protocols to better coordinate across government agencies, particularly between the Department of National Defense, DND, Philippine Coast Guard, PCG, and National Security Council, NSC, to enhance crisis management and ensure rapid, unified responses to gray zone encounters. This institutional adaptation reflects a recognition that China's evolving tactics, blending military, paramilitary, and civilian assets, require interagency deterrence coherence rather than isolated reactions. Central to Manila's evolving approach is the Assertive Transparency Initiative, adopted in 2023 as its primary counter-gray zone strategy. Instead of responding to Chinese coercion with secrecy or silence, the Philippines has opted for exposure, publicizing incidents of aggression through high-definition videos and images of water cannon attacks, dangerous maneuvers, and unlawful blockades. This policy aims to galvanize international attention, transform moral outrage into diplomatic pressure, and impose reputational costs on Beijing. The strategy has proven remarkably effective. In early 2025, the G7 foreign ministers issued a formal statement condemning China's illicit, provocative, coercive, and dangerous actions in the South China Sea, a direct result of Manila's evidence-driven campaign. Through visibility, the Philippines has managed to leverage global opinion as a force multiplier, countering China's might with narrative dominance. The strengthening of defense alliances forms the other key pillar of Manila's counter-strategy. The U.S.-Philippine alliance has expanded through the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, EDCA, which now includes additional rotational sites strategically positioned across Luzon, enhancing logistical and rapid deployment capabilities. Simultaneously, the Japan-Philippines Reciprocal Access Agreement, RAA, finalized in 2025, institutionalizes bilateral training and interoperability, laying the groundwork for joint military exercises and humanitarian operations. These partnerships are complemented by a growing web of multilateral cooperation. In August 2025, the Philippines, the United States, Australia, and Canada conducted joint naval and air exercises near Scarborough Shoal, a symbolic assertion of collective resolve against unilateral militarization. Through these layered defense frameworks, Manila seeks to transform its historically limited deterrence posture into a networked security architecture, one capable of countering coercion through visibility, law, and alliance-based power projection. Between August and October 2025, the West Philippine Sea experienced its most volatile period since the 2012 Scarborough Shoal standoff, underscoring a new phase of confrontation defined by China's rising risk tolerance and operational assertiveness. What had once been a contest of maritime patrols and verbal protests evolved into near-collision incidents, direct physical engagements, and the first documented use of underwater surveillance drones in Philippine waters. This escalation offers concrete evidence that Beijing has moved beyond coercive signaling to controlled brinkmanship, testing Manila's red lines and the resolve of its allies while normalizing the presence of military-grade assets in disputed zones. The chain of events began with the August 11, 2025 collision incident. According to the Philippine Coast Guard, PCG, a Chinese PLA Navy Type 052D destroyer, Hull 164, and a China Coast Guard cutter, Hull 3104, collided with each other while aggressively attempting to intercept and block the smaller PCG vessel, BRP Suluan, near Scarborough Shoal. Video footage released by the PCG showed the chaotic scene. Chinese vessels conducting high-speed maneuvers within dangerously close proximity, ultimately striking one another in their attempt to encircle the Philippine ship. The footage went viral across regional and Western media, prompting the Philippine Department of National Defense to condemn the incident as atrocious and inane behavior. Beijing, notably embarrassed, suppressed domestic reporting of the event, an implicit acknowledgement that the reckless tactics of its own forces risked undermining China's narrative of responsible defense. Escalation continued in mid-September 2025, when a China Coast Guard vessel fired a high-pressure water cannon at close range against a Philippine resupply mission, tearing through the bridge of a civilian contracted support vessel and injuring a Filipino sailor. The attack caused significant structural damage and prompted diplomatic protests from Manila, Washington, and Tokyo. Just weeks later, in late September 2025, Filipino fishermen recovered a Chinese-made autonomous underwater vehicle, AUV, believed to be an intelligence-gathering drone, operating inside Philippine territorial waters. The discovery suggested a widening technological dimension to China's surveillance and maritime domain awareness capabilities, extending the conflict from the surface to the subsurface domain. Together, these events reveal a systematic campaign to expand China's control envelope through sustained, multidimensional pressure, surface, air, and underwater. Yet the pattern of escalation and justification in mid-2025 reveals an unmistakable trend. Beijing is increasingly willing to accept operational risks, even those leading to diplomatic backlash, in pursuit of effective control over Scarborough Shoal. For Manila, this reinforces the reality that the South China Sea has entered an era not of managed rivalry, but of managed confrontation. A delicate balance where every near miss or collision carries the potential to ignite a regional crisis. The situation in the West Philippine Sea has entered a phase of accelerated escalation. The core driver of this spiral lies in China's integration of civilian maritime control forces, the China Coast Guard, CCG, and Maritime Militia, CMM, with high-end military platforms operated by the People's Liberation Army Navy, PLAN, and Air Force, PLAAF. This blurring of lines between law enforcement and military operations creates a seamless, coercive apparatus capable of exerting constant pressure without formally crossing the threshold into declared conflict. Simultaneously, Manila has refused to back down, maintaining a stance grounded in international law and collective security partnerships. This collision of strategies, China's coercive integration versus the Philippines' rules-based defiance, has raised the stakes and narrowed the space for de-escalation, ensuring that even limited encounters now carry outsized geopolitical consequences. At the heart of this intensifying rivalry is Scarborough Shoal, a feature of immense strategic and symbolic importance. Located just 120 nautical miles from Luzon, it serves as both a gateway to the Philippine mainland and a vital traditional fishing ground for thousands of Filipinos. For China, the shoal anchors its northern flank in the South China Sea, and completes a forward line of military infrastructure extending from the Paracels to the Spratlys. For the Philippines, it represents a sovereign right enshrined under the 2016 Permanent Court of Arbitration ruling. This dual significance ensures that neither side can afford to lose face or control, transforming each seemingly minor incident, whether a water cannon blast or a collision, into a national security crisis. As such, Scarborough Shoal has evolved from a contested reef into the epicenter of maritime confrontation in the Indo-Pacific. Looking ahead, the outlook is one of sustained volatility. The region faces a high probability of continued low-level armed confrontations, including ramming incidents, water cannon strikes, laser blinding, and aerial intimidation. While these actions may remain below the formal threshold of armed conflict, the risk of an accidental fatality looms large. Should such a mortal incident occur, it would likely activate the U.S.-Philippines Mutual Defense Treaty, MDT, immediately internationalizing the conflict and drawing the broader Indo-Pacific Alliance network into a potential flashpoint. The combination of increased military deployments, overlapping patrols, and competing red lines creates a combustible environment, where even a single miscalculation could trigger a chain reaction with global implications. Despite the growing tension, a diplomatic pathway remains possible, but only if both restraint and respect for international law prevail. Dialogue through multilateral mechanisms, particularly the ASEAN Regional Forum, ARF, or future ASEAN-led Code of Conduct negotiations, could serve as limited stabilizers. Yet any sustainable resolution requires Beijing's acknowledgement of the 2016 arbitral ruling, and a shift from unilateral coercion to genuine consultation. For its part, Manila must sustain its dual-track strategy of robust transparency to expose and deter unlawful acts and strategic alliance building, to ensure credible deterrence through partnerships with the United States, Japan, Australia, and other like-minded nations. Only through this balance of law, diplomacy, and deterrence can the Philippines navigate the perilous waters of escalation without capitulating or igniting a larger conflict. In conclusion, the transition from gray zone coercion to overt military deployment at Scarborough Shoal marks a defining inflection point in the West Philippine Sea. It has ended Manila's strategic ambiguity, compelling the Philippines to adopt a robust, internationally supported defense posture that simultaneously elevates the risk of confrontation and strengthens the regional security architecture. The stakes transcend bilateral rivalry. Scarborough Shoal has become the litmus test for the effectiveness of international law, alliance-based deterrence, and collective resistance to revisionist territorial claims in the Indo-Pacific. Whether this test ends in deterrence or disaster will define not only the future of Philippine sovereignty, but also the stability of the entire maritime order in Asia. If you liked the video, do not forget to like, share, and subscribe our channel for deep analysis of contemporary issues.